The night in the Negev desert was a blanket of stars, but the darkness inside the armored vehicle was almost absolute, broken only by the pale glow of the monitors. Sergeant Elad Cohen, his eyes fixed on the infrared screen, felt sweat trickle down his temple. The wind outside, a constant howl, seemed to carry the whispers of imminent danger. His team, an elite reconnaissance unit of the Israel Defense Forces, was on a mission that defied conventional military logic, to test a prototype, a device that looked like it came straight out of a low-budget science fiction movie. It was a tube, an ugly, clumsy metal tube that they had nicknamed the Worm. But that worm had a purpose: to penetrate as deep as possible into hostile territory, undetected and without exposing human lives. The border with Lebanon, an invisible line on the map but a deadly barrier in reality, was just a few kilometers away. Hezbollah patrolled incessantly, their eyes and ears trained for any anomaly. And the Worm was the perfect anomaly. The idea was born out of frustration. Traditional patrols were slow, visible and vulnerable. Drones, however advanced, had their limitations: battery life, range, and the risk of being shot down. What Israel needed was something that could infiltrate silently, gather intelligence, and disappear. The answer came from a brilliant yet eccentric mind in the Defense Research and Development Department, Dr. Anat Sharabi. She envisioned a modular, autonomous system capable of crawling underground or camouflaging itself perfectly on the surface, mimicking the topography. The initial concept was met with skepticism. A tube? For what? To carry sandwiches? A general quipped during the presentation. But Sharabi, with her unwavering determination, explained the vision. It wasn't just a tube. It was an exoskeleton for a network of sensors, an artificial brain, and a hybrid propulsion system, all encapsulated in an advanced composite armor designed to absorb radar and infrared waves. The Worm was, in fact, a spy robot. The construction of the prototype was an engineering challenge. Every component needed to be miniaturized and optimized for energy efficiency. The locomotion system, inspired by earthworms and snakes, used a series of articulated segments, each with independent motors that allowed for undulating movements, crawling, or even partially burying itself in the sand. Pressure sensors and gyroscopes ensured stability and orientation on uneven terrain. The Worm's head housed a high-resolution camera with night vision and thermal imaging, a directional microphone capable of picking up conversations hundreds of meters away, and a small ground-penetrating radar to detect tunnels or underground hideouts. Communication was via satellite through an encrypted link, transmitting data in short, intermittent bursts to avoid detection. The Worm's autonomy was measured in days, powered by solid-state batteries and small camouflaged solar panels that unfolded during periods of inactivity. It was a marvel of engineering, born of necessity and ingenuity. The plan for the first real mission was audacious. The Worm would be deployed in a remote area of the desert, near the Lebanese border, and would crawl towards a Hezbollah observation post, known to be a strategic point for monitoring Israeli movements. The objective was not to destroy the post, but to gather detailed information about the guards' routines, the positioning of their weapons, the radio frequencies they used, and most importantly, the presence of tunnels or underground weapons depots. Dr. Sharabi was present at the command center, her eyes fixed on the monitors, a mix of anxiety and pride on her face. Elad, in the armored vehicle, was the primary operator, his fingers nimble on the keyboard, guiding the Worm through the rugged terrain. The night wore on, and the Worm crawled silently. Its rough surface, painted in shades of sand and rock, blended perfectly with the environment. The Hezbollah post's infrared cameras, designed to detect the thermal signature of vehicles and people, registered nothing but the natural variation in ground temperature. The Worm was a ghost, Elad adjusted the sensitivity of the directional microphone. Distant sounds began to emerge, the hum of a generator, muffled voices in Arabic, the barking of a dog. The tension in the armored vehicle's cabin was palpable. Every team member knew that a single mistake, a single flash of light or an unexpected sound could compromise the mission and potentially trigger an international incident. The Worm approached the post. The high-resolution camera transmitted clear images of the makeshift structure made of concrete blocks and sandbags. Two guards, armed with AK-47s, talked in low voices, smoking cigarettes. Elad zoomed in, focusing on the details. The model of the radios on their belts, the emblems on their uniforms, the arrangement of the antennas on the roof. The Worm then activated its ground-penetrating radar. A slow, methodical scan began. Elad's screen showed an underground profile, rock, sand, and then an anomaly, a cavity. These were the exact coordinates of a tunnel that Israeli intelligence had suspected existed but had never been able to confirm. Dr. Sharabi in the command center let out a sigh of relief. The Worm had completed its first major task, but the mission was not complete. The plan included a prolonged observation phase. The Worm nestled into a natural depression in the terrain, further camouflaging itself. For the next 48 hours, it would collect continuous data. The guards' routines, shift changes, the arrival and departure of vehicles. Everything would be recorded. Elad's team took turns monitoring, their eyes glued to the images, looking for patterns, for any clue that could reveal the true extent of Hezbollah's operations in the area. The monotony was broken by moments of adrenaline, such as when a guard dog approached the Worm, sniffing the air before wandering off, seemingly uninterested. The Worm's thermal and olfactory camouflage system was working perfectly. The intelligence gathered by the Worm was invaluable. It confirmed the existence of a complex tunnel network, revealed the location of weapons depots, and identified times of high and low vigilance. This information would be crucial for future defensive and, if necessary, offensive operations. The Worm had proven its worth, but the true story of the terror it would inflict on Hezbollah patrols was yet to begin. Dr. Sharabi and her team were not content with just gathering information. They wanted the Worm to be an element of psychological warfare, an invisible shadow that haunted Israel's enemies. The second phase of the project, dubbed the Ghost of Unexpected Silence, involved a psychological warfare tactic. The idea was simple, yet brutally effective. Use the Worm to create a sense of constant surveillance, of an invisible presence lurking in the shadows, undermining the morale and confidence of Hezbollah patrols. Instead of simply collecting data, the Worm would begin to manifest itself in subtle yet disturbing ways. The first manifestation was the simplest. After days of uninterrupted monitoring, the Worm began to move, not aggressively or obviously, but in irregular and unpredictable patterns. One night, a Hezbollah patrolman reported seeing a shadow crawl across the sand, quickly disappearing behind a dune. His comrades laughed, attributing the sighting to fatigue or imagination. But the next night, another patrolman in a different sector reported something similar. A slender, metallic shape that seemed to emerge from the ground and move with unnatural agility. The reports began to accumulate. The Worm was not being seen clearly, but rather perceived. A distortion in peripheral vision, a strange glint under the moonlight, a subtle dragging sound that seemed to come from nowhere. Elad's team now operated the Worm with the precision of a maestro. They studied Hezbollah's patrol patterns, identifying moments of greatest fatigue and boredom, blind spots in routes, areas where morale seemed lowest. It was at these moments that the Worm would make its ghostly appearance. Sometimes it crawled slowly, exposing only a part of its metallic body before burying itself again. Other times it activated its active camouflage system, causing its silhouette to shimmer and distort like a nocturnal mirage. The goal was to sow doubt, paranoia. What was that? An animal? A new type of drone? Or something more sinister? The effects began to manifest. Hezbollah patrolmen, once confident and vigilant, began to get nervous. Their shifts became more tense, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, searching for something they couldn't define. Reports of sightings increased, and with them, mutual distrust. Some accused others of being drunk or hallucinating. Others, more superstitious, spoke of jinn or desert spirits. Hezbollah's leadership, initially skeptical, began to worry. Their men were losing focus, making mistakes, and morale was plummeting. Orders were issued to increase vigilance, to investigate the sightings, but without success. The worm was too elusive, too intelligent. Dr. Sharabi in the command center observed the intelligence reports with a discreet smile. Her ugly creature was working exactly as planned. The psychological impact was far greater than any direct military action could achieve. The constant, unexplained presence was eroding the enemy's resolve from within. Patrols became erratic, movements became hesitant, and the once disciplined Hezbollah units began to show signs of internal friction. The verme had become a legend, a whispered fear in the dark, a phantom that stalked the borders. The climax of this psychological operation came during a particularly tense period of cross-border skirmishes. Hezbollah, frustrated by the unseen entity, decided to send out specialized teams to hunt down the worm. These were their most experienced trackers, men trained to detect the slightest disturbance in the desert. Elad's team knew this was coming. They had anticipated it, and they had a plan. Instead of retreating, the worm would engage, not in combat, but in a deadly game of cat and mouse. As a Hezbollah tracking team meticulously swept an area known for worm sightings, the Israeli operators activated a new set of capabilities. The worm began to emit low-frequency, almost subliminal sounds, a faint metallic scraping, a high-pitched whine that seemed to resonate deep within the skull, just at the edge of human hearing. These sounds were designed to disorient, to create a sense of unease and auditory hallucinations. Simultaneously, the worm would briefly activate its thermal signature, just enough to register on the tracker's equipment as a fleeting, unidentifiable heat source, then disappear again. It was a symphony of sensory manipulation. The Hezbollah trackers, already on edge, began to unravel. They reported hearing strange noises, seeing phantom movements. Their communications became frantic, filled with fear and confusion. One tracker, convinced he had pinpointed the worm's location, fired a burst from his rifle into an empty patch of sand, only to be ridiculed by his comrades. But the fear was contagious. The constant psychological pressure, the inability to grasp or confront their tormentor, began to break them. One night, a patrol, visibly shaken, abandoned its post. Another reported a demonic entity that seemed to follow them, its metallic eyes glowing in the dark. The reports reached the highest echelons of Hezbollah command. The ugly tube, the seemingly harmless Israeli device, had become a symbol of an unseen, unquantifiable threat. It was not just a piece of technology, it was a psychological weapon, expertly wielded. The patrols were terrified, not by its destructive power, but by its insidious, mind-bending presence. They couldn't fight what they couldn't see, couldn't understand. The worm continued its silent work for months, becoming an urban legend among Hezbollah ranks. Its operations forced changes in patrol routes, increased paranoia, and diverted significant resources to an unwinnable hunt. It was a testament to Israeli ingenuity, a demonstration of how a seemingly simple, ugly piece of technology, when combined with strategic thinking and psychological warfare, could achieve profound tactical and strategic objectives. The worm never fired a shot, never engaged in direct combat, yet it instilled a fear far deeper and more pervasive than any conventional weapon. It proved that sometimes the most terrifying weapon is the one you can't see, the one that haunts your mind, the one that makes you question your own sanity. And in the silent, star-filled nights of the border, the legend of the ugly Israeli tube continued to terrify.